5 million people in the Greater Sydney area are coming to terms this morning with that longer lockdown, which will stretch through all of August at least. The daily case numbers in this 6-week outbreak have been peaking over the last week, and the indications are that's going to get worse with so many of these recent cases out in the community while infectious. So that plea from authorities is growing more determined each day. Stick to the rules and we'll beat this eventually. There's frustration from some quarters though about the fact that they've been included in this lockdown extension. Before we get to our reporters, we'll take you through some maps and graphs. This first one shows the number of exposure sites in very roughly defined areas. So these are spots where there's been a COVID positive person and the chance of transmission to others, places like supermarkets, restaurants, workplaces. This is just Sydney. There are other exposure sites in parts of New South Wales. This is just Sydney. So the biggest number, 227 in that broad area in the west. Suburbs in that include Fairfield up to Blacktown and south to Liverpool. Over closer to the CBD, that 176 figure includes Canterbury, north to Leichhardt, south to Hurstville. Interesting also to note the number of sites there north of the harbour, in that 38 number, including suburbs like Belrose and North Curl. We haven't heard heaps about the northern suburbs through this outbreak so far, and yeah, just interesting to see that number up there. The next map shows where positive cases live in the health districts of Sydney. These are larger areas that can include dozens of councils. This southwestern district of Sydney extends from just south of Parramatta out to the Southern Highlands. More than 1,200 people with COVID there now, and that's out of a total of more than 2,500 in this outbreak so far. Western Sydney has 435 cases. There have been 11 deaths now. And if we zoom in to show a few of the council areas that have big numbers of cases, Fairfield still far and away has the most cases with 823. Neighbouring Canterbury Bankstown, 398. Liverpool has 172 cases. And the two other councils that were added several days ago to those councils with tighter lockdown rules, Cumberland at 221 and Blacktown with 130. And yesterday we had the announcement that 3 more councils were going to be added to these areas with tighter rules. Parramatta has 64 cases, Georges River 87 and Campbelltown in the south 45 cases. And this last graph shows what's happened with case numbers over the past few weeks in this New South Wales outbreak. And you can see at the end there, over the last 7 days, they've been the biggest numbers so far through this outbreak. And the yellow portion of these bars are the numbers of those cases that have been in the community while infectious. Yesterday, you can see there was a little dip in that. The numbers came in around 60, but we don't include in the calculation of that yellow number the number of cases that had not yet been determined when they hold that daily media conference. And yesterday that number was huge. It was 60 I think it was 68. So that number yesterday could well be substantially higher when we're talking about numbers of people in the community while infectious. Cayman Gock joins us now from Parramatta in Sydney's west. So Cayman, take us through the new restrictions for workers in that handful of LGAs.
Yeah, morning, Joe. Yeah, I'm in Parramatta, one of the LGAs, alongside Georges River and Campbelltown. They've now been added to those LGAs of concern. In total, 8 of them. That means more than 2 million people are under these strict stay-at-home orders. You're not allowed to leave your LGA unless you are an authorised worker. And those authorised workers in Canterbury Bankstown are now required to be tested every 3 days under surveillance testing. Now, the Premier announced some more specific restrictions yesterday, and that included that the construction industry will resume on the weekend. That is good news for that industry, which is estimated to bring about $500 million to the economy a week. That is for non-occupied sites only at the moment. That means construction where there are no residents. But there will be no construction in these 8 LGAs of concern. So sites like the Parramatta Light Rail near me, that will remain closed and shut off. And it also means that tradies that live in these areas affected in southwest and western Sydney can't work. They have to abide by these strict rules and stay at home. So the Premier announced these more targeted responses and restrictions in the hope that this will quash the curb and hopefully change the trend the numbers have been tracking in. Joe?
Yeah, we should point out that their authorised workers can still leave those LGAs, and there is quite a list of those authorised workers. And so, if you're in those LGAs and you're not sure of what the situation is, you can just type in New South Wales authorised workers and go through that list and see if you're still entitled to leave those areas. And Cayman, what other changes have been made for the next 4 weeks of lockdown?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, the construction industry will open again, and also tradies and cleaners will be allowed to go to people's homes so long as there is absolutely no contact with the residents. There are strict caps too. Only 2 people are allowed indoors and 5 people outdoors. We also learnt that homeschooling will continue for the next month, but there is a plan to get Year 12 students back into the classrooms for face-to-face learning in the next fortnight. Those Year 12 students that are in those 8 LGAs of concern will receive a Pfizer jab, and those doses will be redistributed from rural and regional New South Wales. The state government also wants to introduce rapid antigen testing of Year 12 students and also some areas of authorised workers, and that's to hopefully mitigate any future outbreaks. The singles bubble will go ahead as previously talked about, and that means that anyone who lives by themselves can nominate one person to come to their house. It's also important to note that if you live in one of those LGAs of concern, you can only nominate someone that also lives in the same LGA as you or lives about within 10 kilometres from your home. There are also shopping restrictions now in place. Similarly, you can't leave your LGA and you can only shop within 10 kilometres of where you live. The other big announcement was the financial support packages have been bolstered significantly, both for businesses and individuals. This applies for businesses that have lost more than 30% of revenue. Previously, the maximum weekly payment was $10,000. That's now jumped to $100,000, and they'll be based on the business's payroll value. The number of businesses eligible has also doubled for these payments. Regarding individuals, if you've lost more than 20 hours of work, previously you got about $600 a week. Now the maximum payment is $750 a week. Importantly to note, people on welfare payments who previously weren't eligible for this can now receive an additional $200 on top of their Centrelink payment if they've lost more than 8 hours of work. Joe?
Okay, Cayman Gok reporting there from Parramatta in Sydney. And yeah, so a lot of people will be keen on listening into that media conference today, which is usually held at 11 Eastern Standard Time, when the Premier or other New South Wales officials step up with the latest information on the Sydney COVID outbreak. We'll bring you that live here on the ABC News channel. Investigations continue into the infection of a traffic controller at a coronavirus testing clinic in Melbourne's northwest. It's one of 7 new cases today, so those numbers have just come through for Victoria. 7 is the number for today. Reporter Oliver Gordon joins us now from Melbourne. Oliver, so just take us through those numbers. Were all of those people isolating through their infectious period or not?
So we had 42,000 tests processed yesterday. They revealed 7 new cases of COVID. 6 of those 7 were in isolation when they became infectious, but one of them wasn't. That one person is the traffic control worker that you've just been speaking about. He was working here at this testing site at the Moonee Valley Racecourse in Melbourne's northwest. Yesterday it was shut, it was given a deep clean, and it may actually reopen to the public as soon as today. It's been listed as a Tier 3 exposure site, so that means anyone who came here on Sunday or Monday needs to monitor for symptoms, and if anything comes up, get tested immediately. There are also exposure sites that have been added. These are Tier 2 exposure sites in Frankston, Frankston South, Yarraville and Altona. What do we know about this traffic control worker? Well, he was wearing a mask when he was working here at this site. He wasn't wearing full PPE gear like people who take tests do. Health authorities are somewhat concerned, but say the risk is pretty low if you actually came here to get a test, because most people don't actually wind down their windows when they get a test. But certainly this new case, Joe, has been a reminder to us here in Victoria that COVID is still around. We haven't really seen any cases infectious in the community since before last weekend. So this is the first one we've seen in a few days, and as we come out of lockdown, certainly a bit concerning.
Yeah, and so Oliver, we assume that those those fresh exposure sites at Frankston, including at Frankston, were related to this guy who worked on traffic direction at this testing clinic?
Yeah, I mean, that's the assumption at the moment. They went up overnight, so, that's what we can assume, yeah.
And have you noticed much activity there at the testing clinic this morning?
Look, not really. We've had a few cars coming through. I don't think it's actually reopened to the public yet, but yeah, we've had a few cars coming through, we're just waiting to see when it'll be reopened to the public.
Yeah. And what's happening with the discussion around the protests over the weekend?
Yeah, so we saw this freedom rally here in Victoria on Saturday. Some images have been released of some people who were letting off flares. I think it was around Parliament House. I was actually there on Saturday, Joe, as these flares were released. I've got very vivid sort of memories of watching the red smoke come up over Parliament House. It was certainly a very striking image. But today, police have released images of 3 people. We've got a man in his late 20s and early 30s. He was wearing a grey and black hoodie. Another man in his 30s. He was wearing a plain black tee. And a woman in her 20s who was wearing a blue puffer. So police are appealing for information about any of these people.
And Oliver, in New South Wales, there's been a bit of discussion. Police have warned people not to attend any protests this weekend. There was a bit of online chatter apparently about a possible protest this weekend, but police in New South Wales were going to say they were going to crack down on that pretty heavily. Has there been any similar discussion around that in Victoria, or no hint of that at all that you've heard of?
Look, there's been some discussion online about it, but I don't think they've progressed as far as they have in Sydney. I saw that someone involved in the same organisation that organised the one that happened last Saturday had mentioned that there would possibly be another protest late September. No idea if we're going to see another one this weekend, but health authorities certainly don't want to see that, especially with COVID now back in the community, so to speak.
Okay, Oliver Gordon reporting there from Melbourne. Let's head north to Queensland now. 2 backpacker hostels in Brisbane remain in lockdown after a COVID-positive case spent time there. Reporter Michael Rennie joins us now from Brisbane. Michael, g'day. Yes, I've got to say, when this media conference popped up yesterday and they started going through this case, and Jeanette Young mentioning that this person was in the community while infectious for quite some time, listening into that, you thought, geez, the potential for this to get ugly is pretty high. So what's happening there now?
Yeah, it certainly is a real risk there, Joe, and I think the Queensland government is taking this very, very seriously, because we've been here all morning and we've seen a large number of police here throughout the morning. It's pretty quiet here right now, but we've seen police. We've also seen an ambulance pull up this morning. And I think they're taking this very, very seriously, because this was all sparked when a returned traveller from the Philippines, he's a West Australian man, he was staying at the Roma Street City backpackers behind me. That's the orange building, if you can see it. But he's been staying there for a number of days and been out in the community for almost 7 days. So that sees the 2 backpackers behind me locked down, and he actually tested negative while he was in hotel quarantine. And so it was when he's been released that he's become sick and then done the right thing and actually gone and get tested. So both backpackers locked down at the moment, and it's understood that everyone inside will be getting tested, and then it'll just be a matter of where they go to from there.
And Michael, what's been the discussion around this case in Queensland? Are authorities saying at this stage whether or not they think he possibly caught it in hotel quarantine, or it's a lingering case?
Well, that's what genomic sequencing will determine, and that's really where they go to from here, is do that genomic testing and see if we can match it up with another case that they've already seen. And that's been really successful in the past to be able to do that. That really has been just an amazing bit of technology that they're able to utilise, and that's been able to track down where some of these returned travellers have initially caught the virus.
And so how many people are in isolation there? Is it just in the backpackers, or are there other people in isolation now around Queensland because of this case?
Well, at the moment, it's just the two backpackers behind me, and we've actually been talking to one of the managers of one of the backpackers. So he says that between the two locations, the two hostels, there is around 62 people inside, and this manager, he's saying it's a family-run business, but he is actually staying inside one of the hotels for the duration of while this lockdown is going on. And it's understood that some of these people, most of them are doing pretty well inside, but some of them are struggling. Some of them have actually been through this sort of thing before. They've been through a lockdown before, so they know what they're in for and are struggling a little bit. And then there's others inside who are worried about their financial situation and how long this drags on for, because potentially they're ineligible to receive any sort of payment or any assistance while they're in there. So they can't go and work. So they're just worried about how long they could be in there. And from what this manager has been told, it could be up to 14 days that he is in there. We're going to get an update from Queensland Health hopefully a little bit later on this morning to determine exactly what the situation is there. Are they all going to be kept in there for 14 days? Are some of them going to be allowed out? We don't really know exactly what the time frame will be at this stage, but at the moment, it's up in the air about how long they'll be there for.
Yep. Okay, Michael Rennie reporting there from Brisbane. Yeah, so we'll expect, we'll bring you that media conference with Queensland officials a little later on this morning. If we have to break out of that for some reason, that will be broadcast also live on the ABC News YouTube live stream. So you'll be able to watch that one. Yeah, yesterday it kind of popped up. We had a fair bit on. We had to get out of it. But if we do, you can go to the ABC News YouTube live stream and you'll see it there. But yeah, there'll be a fair bit of interest in that Queensland media conference today, taking into account that person was infectious in the community for several days. Okay, let's get more on the latest financial support from the federal government for people in locked down Greater Sydney. Political reporter Melissa Clark joins us now from Parliament House in Canberra. Mel, g'day. So what additional support is the federal government offering?
So there's going to be additional support both for businesses and for workers who have been affected by COVID lockdown, as outlined yesterday. Let's take you through the details. Let's start with the business support. So this will continue to be administered by the New South Wales government, but jointly funded. And at the moment, businesses that have had a reduction in their turnover have been able to get support in the order of around 40% of their payroll. But what's being done now is that's being expanded so that more businesses can access it. It was previously limited to businesses that had a turnover of $50 million at the most. That's being pushed out to $250 million. So a lot of medium-sized businesses there will now be able to access this support. It means that the maximum payment that you could get, being a 40% of your payroll approximately, goes up from 10 grand to potentially up to 100 grand, provided your businesses still meet the requirement. So that is showing a 30% reduction in turnover, and that you don't lay off any of your staff. You must retain the same staffing levels. If we look to the support for workers now, these are the COVID disaster payments that have been in place for workers who've lost hours. It had been until now, if you had lost more than 20 hours of work, you could get a $600 weekly payment. That's being boosted to $750 a week. And if you're part-time and casual and you've lost between 8 and 20 hours, your payment goes from $375 a week to $450 a week. Now, one new additional measure that's quite interesting and will certainly help some people is if you are currently on some kind of welfare benefit, maybe you're on a parenting payment or Oz Study, and if you've lost hours, up until now you haven't been able to get any extra support, from Monday there will be a $200 a week supplement that you can get if you've lost more than 8 hours of work. However, if you are a job seeker and you don't have any work at the moment, that supplement is not available to you. And these higher rates that are being put in place will be the case for any future lockdowns as well. It won't come in at that $600 a week rate, it'll come in at the $700 a week rate for affected workers. So they're the two main changes that we saw combined from New South Wales and the federal government yesterday to try and help people from this point forth.
Yeah, so that was to do with the Greater Sydney lockdown. What's happening with Victoria?
There's a recognition here that even though restrictions are easing in Victoria, there's still a lot of requirements that are having a big impact on business. In particular, the fact that there are still these density requirements or spatial requirements where you can only have one person per 4 square metres, and that still has a big impact on a lot of businesses. So the state and federal government, the Victorian and Commonwealth governments combined to bring forward some measures to support them. So for businesses like gyms, hairdressers, cafes that have that one person per 4 square metre rule, and they're smaller businesses, they can get a grant up to $5,000. And for bigger licensed hospitality venues, they can get up to $20,000 to help them while these restrictions are still in place. And as an extra bonus for those businesses that might be in the CBD, which has been hit really hard by the fact that a lot of workers are still expected to work from home, they can get an extra $2,000 on top of that. And then as well as those measures, there are a few extra things put in place by the Victorian government to help with commercial tenancies, in recognition that a lot of businesses are struggling with rent at the moment. And also for the alpine industry in particular, given not only have they been hit by COVID this winter and last winter, but also by bushfires over summer. So there'll be some extra support for businesses in the Victorian high country. So look, the Federal Treasurer Josh Frydenberg says that these initiatives now are looking at costing around $750 million a week. So that's $750 million a week now. But the cost is not something that he's going to focus on at the moment. He's not worried about debt and deficit levels. He's more worried about doing what needs to be done to try and help suppress COVID-19. Here he is speaking to the ABC a little earlier this morning.
Certainly costing the economy, the budget and the country a significant amount of money. But we have no alternative other than to ensure that we get on top of these outbreaks when they occur. And my sense is that you'll now see shorter and sharper lockdowns as the default position of state governments until we get a sufficient number of people vaccinated.
Josh Frydenberg there, and of course making the very pertinent point there is that they're waiting for a greater proportion of the population to be vaccinated. They're going to have to keep spending this order of financial support because at the moment this kind of suppression and lockdown is their best effort until the vaccination levels get higher. So they're really pinning their hopes on the population later on in the year being at a much higher level of vaccination.
Okay, Melissa Clark there in Canberra.